This is Tinkereddiesel Garage. My name's Phil, and welcome to this giant mess of crap. This is a 1968 F100, and it's the wiring build series that we've been working on for the last couple of episodes. And the whole purpose of this is really to give you guys an idea of really what goes into doing a wiring job on a truck like this. Now, disclaimer, I'm not a professional, I'm not a shop, I don't even have a business, I do this for fun. So this isn't a how-to video, this is basically how I'm doing it video. So I would say, look at what I'm doing, learn what you may want to do, what you don't want to do. You can do it like me or you don't have to do it like me. And this is just what I'm doing on this particular truck. So just to recap, what we're working on in this video is we're doing the Restomod air conditioning. We're installing the American Autowire wiring harness for 67 to 72 F100 pickup trucks. And we're doing the Ford Racing control pack. Now, I've used other control packs. I've used Nathan Henley's, I've done Power by the Hour, and now Ford Racing control pack. And I've done several of each. A lot of these Coyote swaps I've done. And in this video, I'm going to detail the Ford Racing control pack, the American Autowire wiring harness, and how to integrate those two together. And I think that is the point where people are getting super confused, and I get tons of questions in my inbox and on my videos of what I do and how I integrate these things. So without further ado, let's jump into this thing. Now, in the last video, you saw me start prepping the truck to get it ready for the wiring harness. And I did things like I made adjustments to the fuel pedal, the brake pedal, and got all those in alignment. I installed the dyno matting throughout the cab. I made some adjustments to the engine, started shoring up some grounds, and I installed the charging system. That's the frame mounted battery, all the power distribution as it's running up to the front of the engine compartment, and I installed a really strong grounding system throughout the vehicle. So now that all those prerequisites are in place, we can do the fun stuff of actually landing and installing this American Auto wiring harness, the AC system, and we can get cracking away on this Ford Racing control pack. So let's get started. All right, hear me out. I know this is the part that starts to scare everybody, but I assure you it is not as bad as you think. As long as you read the directions and you employ industry best practices when you're installing this thing, it can be very easy, and it's very fulfilling work. Now, the purpose of this video is not to do an unboxing of the American Autowire wiring harness or go through the detail of showing you how this particular harness is wired into an F100. What I am going to show you though is some of the major components of this, getting it powered up. But what's most important for this video is that I'm going to show you how to integrate this American Autowire wiring harness into an F100 truck when you're doing a Coyote swap. So there are a few different things you're going to have to do. Some stuff you'll remove from this harness, some stuff you'll add to the harness in order for this to integrate well with the Ford Racing control pack. Let's just open this up. A quick overview of the major components here. You're gonna get a couple of documents here. So you've got obviously the heart of this system is the fuse box. And so you see this new fuse box here. And one of the biggest concerns for people that are doing this, or DIYers that are doing this, is the original fuse box that came in this truck is significantly smaller, and it used glass bus fuses. And then they see this one and they think they have the wrong part that they ordered, and that's just not true. This is a little bit bigger of a fuse box, but it's giving you a lot more features and functionality of it. And it's integrated. Some of the stuff that was hidden up under the dash is now consolidated down here in the fuse box, like blinkers and stuff like that, hazard relay and those type of things. So now it's down here right in the fuse box where it's easy to access. So you want to pay close attention to this document because it does show you important information, safety and stuff like that. But most importantly, how to properly mount this larger fuse box under the dash. I'll go over that part with you guys too. And then obviously there's this junk. This is the most important part of the wiring harness, is this guy right here. Now this set of electrical drawings, I think it's done very, very well, and it's catered to the DIYer. There is a little bit of missing information in here, but it is everything you need to properly install this wiring harness in an F100 truck. The parts that are missing are more general electrical representations, and this type of drawing is more of like a flow chart type drawing than it is an actual electrical diagram. So it just kind of shows you where things are routed, and then circuit bundles, what things are grouped together, and that type of thing. So the standard electrical drawings that you would see in a factory service manual, none of that is here. It basically gives you a narrative of how the wiring harness is installed, and a couple basic guides on how to terminate some of the ends and things like that. So this is helpful, I think, for a DIYer. I think it would still add a little bit of confusion, and that's probably why you get some folks that are doing this at home that have complaints about this. Some other options that you could use are something like one of these things. These are super cheap. You can buy these online on eBay, but essentially this is like, it all fits on a like 11 by 17 sheet right here, and it's a full wiring harness guide that actually does show all the interconnectivity between circuits. Now, what this does not show are important things like wire gauge, size, amperage, fuse sizing, overload protection. None of that is on here, unfortunately. So a lot of guys buy these cards right here and they swear by them, and maybe they're helpful in some instances, but they don't show you everything. Now this one is for a 66 Dodge Coronet, and I bought it really just for the purpose of showing the wiring in the video. But this right here, you can get these things right here online pretty much anywhere. I got this on eBay for like $25, and this one is just for a 66 Coronet. But this is the actual factory service manual, the section of it that is the wiring diagram. And this right here has pretty much everything you could possibly need to know. And it's got the actual wire ID numbers right here, and then it shows the color of it. It does show the gauge, and so on. And so you have the actual wire markers right here. And so you see the full circuitry of every single wire, every bulkhead, and so on in the vehicle. And it's a few different pages, and it's very, very detailed with these schematics right here. I would highly recommend that you actually buy a factory service manual. But for the purpose of what we're doing here, I have installed at least a half dozen of these in F100 pickup trucks before, so I kind of know these like the back of my hand. I don't really need to follow any wiring guide from me personally. And again, this isn't a how-to, this is a what I'm doing video. All right, let's pull this out right here. This is the main wiring harness right here. And a lot of this stuff is pre-terminated. So you see right here on the ends of the wires, like for instance, this one right here, all the wiring is pre-terminated on the connector here. And so most of the connectors are pre-terminated, but there are some stuff that you will have to cut to length and terminate yourself. And they give you everything you could possibly need to do this, and then some. You're gonna end up, like I said, I've done so many of these things now that I have got like this little baggie of bulkheads, grommets, door switches, and all these miscellaneous connectors that are in this bag. I have got a huge box full of these things because they give you so much stuff that you don't need. Okay, so let's see here, you just get, and each individual packet has its own set of instructions. And so as you're going through the larger instruction sheet right here, this will prompt you or invoke the smaller instruction set. So it will tell you when to actually use this set as you go through this guide right here, right? So there's those. you get primary power distribution stuff. So here we go with the mega fuses and a bunch of lugs and connectors and stuff like that. Obviously, you just saw that we installed all the power distribution. I did all that before I even opened this kit, but this kit assumes you haven't done any of that. And it also assumes that the battery is located in the factory location as well. So they only give you enough wire to run from underneath the hood to the engine block and to the starter. And they give you, wire sizing gauge that is specific to that. So we don't need to use this bag because we've already done the power distribution. And then you've got the rear body kit. So this is a huge knoll of wires right here. And essentially what they've done is they've made it super easy for us. So you install the fuse box, which is that big bag that I showed you there, kind of lay all that wiring out. And then there's one connector that connects the whole rear section of the truck to the fuse box and joins it that way versus having it all rolled up and connected together. So it makes it much, much easier to install this way. I really like doing that. So that'll be like one of the last things we install. And this has, like, for instance, in this bundle right here, this has pretty much every wire you're going to need for the rear of the truck, including things like, now also keep in mind that this is completely stock. This wiring harness is set up so that it's assuming you have a stock engine, stock transmission, stock gear shifter, gauge cluster, wiper motor, everything, dash lights, dome light, rear tail lights, everything is stock. You haven't made any adjustments to it, right? And so it gives you the correct lighting connectors like that for like the marker lights, the tail lights, the headlights, and all that stuff. It's all stock. So what we'll be doing is modifying some of this harness so that it fits and works well with a Coyote motor. So for instance, on a Coyote motor, you don't have a distributor cap, you don't have a coil, you don't have a starter solenoid, you don't have a voltage regulator. It's internally regulated by the alternator now, right? So like a lot of those components you don't need, and we're gonna end up removing that from the wiring harness. And there's also some stuff that you're going to need, and we'll have to add that in, but it's really not difficult. We'll go through this video pretty quickly, but don't be afraid of this. It's so easy to do. All right. And they give you everything you need. Look, you've got relays and blinker hazard warnings. You got the horn relay here and that one. And they give you all the dash switching components. For instance, this is the wiper motor switch right here. What they don't give you that really bothers me, they give you this, the wiper motor switch, but the little screw here and the decorative bezel for the dash that says wipers, they don't give you that. They don't give you the actual nut that captures this into the dash. They don't give you that. So you got to buy that stuff separately. And then of course, Ford decided to make 47 different versions of this thing with different thread pitches. So I had to end up going out and buying 4 different ones until I got the right thread pitch. But those are things like if you're going to be doing a lot of these vehicles, just buy a bunch of them, which I did. So you get the wiper switch, you get the light switch right here. So that's like the full light switch right there. You get the actual key switch, the key tumbler right here. You get that. And again, you're not getting the bezel that screws it into the truck, right? You don't get any of that stuff. You don't get a set of keys. You don't get the key tumbler itself. You just get the body of it right here where the wiring goes. And then I'm sure a lot of you know what this guy is right here. That's the floor switch that switches from high beams to low beams. And then obviously other miscellaneous wiring bundles that you may or may not need. Like for instance, this one's the instrument cluster. So this entire wiring harness, we're not going to use because we're using a Dakota Digital gauge set, and we're going to be doing some wild stuff with that, with this wiring harness. So I'm going to go over those type of things in detail, but as far as like the general wiring of this truck, I may show routing the wires, but I'm not going to go into the detail of like how to install this entire wiring harness here. Okay. All right, so what I generally like to do is kind of get that huge bag and get everything out of that bigger bag. And I kind of lay it all out logically where you think it would go outside of the dash. Now you see all this nice fresh paint right here. You just want to be careful that these connectors and stuff like that don't scratch into this paint. I've got a way where I snake it up in there where I don't really worry about it. And again, we're not doing a SEMA truck here, okay? This thing is going to be a daily driver, all right? So the first thing we need to do on this entire package of doing the American Auto wiring harness is locating and installing the fuse box. Once that's done, everything goes so much easier. So that's really the hardest thing, in my opinion, is locating and mounting the fuse box. Then we'll start routing these major knolls of wire here, these bundles. And don't be surprised if you're going to end up having to cut zip ties, move wires around, then re-zip tie it again. I go through bags and bags and bags of zip ties. I just get them from Harbor Freight. They're super cheap. All right, so let me start routing this into place, and then we'll bring you guys in closer and we can actually start landing some of this stuff. All right, so I got you guys in here and I got some lighting to try and help explain this. It is very difficult to get good camera shots in small areas up underneath the dash, but let me zoom up in here. So if you can see up underneath there, I went ahead and mounted the fuse box, and you see the wires are pointed up. And if you point them down, you're gonna lose about 8 inches of length. I've made that mistake in the past, so you wanna make sure your wires are pointed up. That way they branch off to the left and to the right, and then actually go out toward the front of the truck. And so it's kind of, it looks like it's sitting sideways, but that's actually correct. So now the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take all of this wiring right here, we're gonna start going through it and cutting stuff out of here that we don't need. For instance, this right here, this VSS signal and power, we don't need any of that. We're not gonna need the coil, we're not gonna need distributor stuff. There's a bunch of miscellaneous stuff that we don't need, and I'm going to start cutting that stuff out of here. So let's do that now. All right, you see all this stuff right here, right? A lot of this stuff is going to end up, this huge knoll is going to go, we're over here on the driver's side now, looking inside the instrument cluster area. So this huge knoll right here is going to end up going that way, across over to the passenger side, and then eventually through a firewall bulkhead and then out to the front of the car.
All right, I'm going to voice over a little bit here. So you can see where I'm routing some of these wires up and over the dash, and there's that plate right there that ties in the bottom of the dash and steering column and structurally ties it into the rest of the cab of the truck. And so you can see that there's kind of two big 2-inch wire ties there, and that is where the large section of wires is going to get affixed right there. Later on, where you see where those two big wire ties are, those are like 2-inch wire ties, that is where the stock location of the wire bundle is supposed to go. We're actually not going to put it there. We're going to tuck it down way down at the bottom later on, and we're going to use that section up top to mount the Dakota Digital gauge controller, and then there's the GSS 3000, and then there is the BIM-01-02 module. All that stuff is going to get mounted on that plate up there, and you're gonna want it to mount that as high as possible, and I'll show you that here shortly. So let's finish routing all these wires over to the right side of the truck dash. So if you look at this drawing here, this came with the kit from American Autowire, and this is basically the logical layout of where all the different wires are in this harness here, the main section of the harness. So you see you've got the fuse box on the left, and then coming off of that immediately, you've got a dimmer switch, you've got the rear body harness down there. We'll show that here in a moment, but that you're going to want to have as far to the left of the vehicle, up against the firewall, or as close to the firewall as possible, because there's a rear body harness that's going to clip into that clip right there, and it's going to allow us to run all the wires through that grommet on the left side of the truck, down along the frame rail into the back of the truck, and that'd be all for your lights and stuff like that. So you can see as you move this harness along, if you pay attention to the drawings here, you'll see things like your brake warning lamp, the headlight switch connection. You'll see things like the wiper motor assembly plug. As you lay the harness across the dash, those pigtails and connectors should end up laying right about where they are supposed to go. And that tells you that you have this routed correctly. So for instance, the heater blower motor, just right behind about where the ashtray and the stereo system would go is where those three wires should just kind of lay naturally. And then the blower resistor and those things, right? And so as you just lay this across there, just let it lay naturally across, the different braces inside the dash, as you see me doing here. Now, we could only get as far as around the stereo area where you see the three wires for the stereo, the brown, tan, and yellow there. To go any further, we're going to start routing all this stuff out the passenger side of the firewall, but we can't do that just yet because we need to get the Restomod air conditioning or that air handler installed. And so let's break from here and go back to the video of the truck, and we'll start getting that installed.
All right, we're looking across into the passenger side now, and you see this door. It's not really a door, it's really a vent. Now, we're actually not going to be using that vent ever again because we have modernized air conditioning. So we actually need to cover that vent up. And we bought the Restomod air conditioning kit, and that kit was designed for this truck specifically. And so it comes with a little blank door, this guy right here. And it's got 3 holes pre-drilled into it, and it's made to cover up that hole right there. So I'm not just going to put self-tapping screws in there. I'm actually going to use my riv nuts, and I'm actually going to use my riv nuts and use a few of these guys right here. I'm also going to put a little bit of sealant so that you don't get any air seeping through. One thing that would happen if I just put this up there like that and you had little tiny air gaps is when you're hitting about 80 miles an hour down the road, air will seep through here and start whistling, and it will drive you out of your mind. So you want to seal it up real good so you don't get any of that whistling. Restomod air conditioning. Some people go with vintage air, classic air, and all these other things. I go with Restomod. I like Restomod because it's designed specifically to be used with doing restomods, right? Like if you're going to be putting a Coyote or something like that inside a classic car. And they've got a ton of really high-end parts, accessories and stuff like that you can buy, like with switches, knobs, hoses, and stuff like that. And if you're going to be doing a really pretty restoration, they've got everything you need to do that. So they're a little pricier, but I feel like their systems, they just look nicer. They operate a little bit better in my opinion, but those are the ones that I buy. All we're going to be doing is in this segment of the video is we're just going to be installing the actual unit itself. Like I said, we need to get that in there in order to finish the wiring under the dash. So in order to install that, we've got to punch some holes through the firewall. We've got to run some hoses. We got to crimp hoses and do everything inside to get that unit installed. And then we'll block off the hoses underneath the hood, and we'll come back to finishing the AC later. But for now, we're just going to get that unit installed and get all the stuff that's required inside done. So let's pull this unit out. I'm going to, in one of the future videos for this system, I'm going to be going over all these individual components right here and how to install them. All right, so what I'm going to need right away is this guy right here. Inside this box is a really nice bulkhead that Restomod offers, and it allows you to pass through the AC hoses from under the engine compartment into the cab of the truck. Look at that. Looks like really nice billet aluminum. And basically that's a bulkhead, and you'll have your high pressure, low pressure, and then your forward and return heater hose connections right here. So you have all four of these all in one line. Normally what I do is actually cut it. I actually cut this thing straight down the middle, and I have my AC a little bit further toward the middle of the firewall, and this one toward the passenger side of the firewall. For me, routing the hoses works better that way, and you'll see why here in a moment. So first thing we need to do is actually start cutting holes and getting this guy installed, and then lifting up that AC unit into the truck. Now, if you look right here, I already marked where we're going to be coring holes and installing this, but these two right here are going to go right here. Now remember, we have this inner fender. This inner fender comes down. It's not installed right now, obviously, but it's going to come down right through here. Okay. I want my heater hoses to come straight underneath the fender and go into the truck right here. So we're going to use the two heater hose connections right here. We're going to cut this right here and put those here. And then the high and low pressure for the AC, we're going to take this section of it and we're going to put it over here, because the inner fender is going to come down and split these two. It's going to come down right here. So our AC lines will come right through here on the inside of the engine compartment, and our heater hoses will come out from underneath here and dive in right here. This is the most awkward pain in the butt to install, and because it's in really tight quarters up underneath the dash, and really trying to fit screws up underneath there. My hands are massive, and so I'm holding nuts with needle nose pliers, and then using zip ties to try and hand tighten nuts, and then I can get a socket. Massive nightmare. Anyways, this normally takes me about a half day to install just this piece right here. So it is time consuming. It's kind of a pain, and you just got to take your time with it. And so you really takes a lot of pre-planning. I've kind of got this dialed in to where I know exactly where it needs to go in a bump side truck. Now, notice I have these brackets on here, these little L brackets or whatever that came with the kit. I use these, right? So I buy this kit directly from Restomod AC. I don't buy it from Fat Fender Garage. Now, Fat Fender Garage sells this same kit. It is tailored specifically to custom builds. They give you different brackets with this kit, and it's pretty nice. They're really nice brackets. They work very, very well, and it locates this in the correct position every time. And it's, like I said, it's a very, very nice kit. Nice billet aluminum design, and it works every time. It is a lot more expensive. I mean, I think it's like, don't quote me on this, but I think it's like $1,000 more for the same kit, but with like the added features, right? The directions, the brackets, and whatever else it comes with. Now, if you're a DIY guy and you want to make this whole process go a little bit faster, and you want to take all the guesswork out of it, highly recommend you buy that kit from Fat Fender. Like I said, it's pretty pricey, but it takes all the guesswork out of it. Now, I've done several of these installs in bump side trucks. I have my method that I use where I can use the standard bracket that comes with this, and it bolts in just fine. You are limited on where you can route your hoses. So Fat Fender, Their kit makes it so that you route your hoses through the vent over here. It hides them. It's a lot cleaner look. And it just all works really, really nicely. Now my hoses, you'll have to bend down and look up underneath the dash to see them, but they're not really hidden. You know, they're kind of out in the open a little bit, but like I said, you're not going to see them if you're just sitting in the truck, just looking down at the floor. You won't see them. But it does, like I said, I have to go through the firewall and not through the vent in order to do it. So, you know, it's like give and take. You know, if I was doing a show car, obviously I would use, you know, a much nicer system, either use fat fenders or I'd custom make some nice brackets that work really good for me and you wouldn't see any wires, any hoses or anything like that. So, all right, I'm gonna start locating this. First thing I'm gonna do is set it up in there, and then I'm gonna start marking the holes that I need to drill. I'll drill those and then just start getting this mounted up in place. All right, right now we're looking inside the truck, and this is the glove box, where the glove box is going to be. Now, if you install this unit right here to where it's way up here, obviously you're not, all your hoses need to come out of here too, and you will not be able to use the glove box, right? The way I like to mount this thing is I bring it down right here so that it is flush with the bottom of this. So the top of this is flush with the bottom of this. When I do it like that, it gives me lots of room to put the glove box in. I can route my hoses, and my hoses tuck right behind this right here, and they tuck right up here. Now there are shallower glove boxes that you can buy. You can get them from Summit Racing or Amazon, and they're about half, maybe even a quarter of the depth of the original glove box. And it allows you to make room for all these ducts and hoses that are going to be back here. So that's the one I recommend you get, is the shallow one. It's going to work out a lot easier for you and give you more room up in here. So, all right, so what you might notice is right here, I've got the two 5/8 90-degree bulkheads in right here. And those are going to, I'm going to connect my hose from here, and they're going to swoop, kind of arc right up here into this corner right there. And then 90 over, will kind of arc over into the top right here. So if you see these right here, you have your feed and return, and they're just going to hug this corner right here, just like that. And then kind of like a nice 180 right here, from here all the way down to right there. So that looks good. I need to put some hose clamps on here, and should be good to go with that. These are very tight quarters right here. So you see this bracket right here. If you put your hose clamp just, you know, a ½ inch to the right, you can't get your wrench in here to get this bolt tightened. So I learned my lesson a while back to put my clamp as far back as I can, so that I can get my socket or a wrench in here on this. All right, so now we're ready to route this section over here up over, and make sure you get it over this bracket here. You want to mount this up over this bracket, across, up over the heater core, and then through that hole where that grommet is that we talked about earlier. So it's going to go dive right down in there and go out toward, through the firewall, out toward the front of the truck. So let's get that thing routed. All right, it's looking a lot better up underneath here and less cluttered inside the cab now that we got most of those wires out through the firewall out there. But most people would kind of leave these wires kind of like this, but listen to this. You hear the sound of the wires moving around and touching the plastic and the metal and stuff like that. Well, I want a much more comfortable ride, and I started doing this on the last couple of builds that I've done, and I started using this stuff right here. It's called, it's a different type of Tessa tape, and you probably know the woven style of Tessa tape that's protects against heat and abrasion and stuff like that. This right here is meant to use inside the cab of the vehicle. It's kind of like a fabric and it's soft to the touch. If you wrap these wires, these bundles of wires with this stuff right here, it decreases the amount of, sound that occurs when you're like driving around, you hit bumps and you can hear like stuff rattling underneath the dash. Well, when you wrap it with this stuff, you hear a lot less of that, and it just makes for a much more smoother and comfortable ride. So I'm actually going to end up, once we get most of this stuff installed, I'm going to pull this wiring harness back and wrap the whole harness in this tape right here. And that's going to make it much cleaner. It's going to look nicer and cleaner under here as well. All right, now that we're here though, let's go through and look at some of these wires that are still inside the truck right here. So we've got one set of wires right here, and you'll see a lot of these in the harness. This one says, I don't know if you can see it or not, but it says courtesy switch. That's the blue one. And then the red one, or this orange one, is 12 volt fused. And what that means is that you don't have to have the ignition on in order to get power on this wire right here. So as long as you have the battery connected to the fuse box, this is going to be constant power. And the purpose of this wire right here is this is going to plug into the door switch. And we're going to install these guys. This came with the American Autowire wiring harness, and you see you've got the two connection points right there for that wire. So this, you just drill the appropriate size hole, and then this pops right into place and latches itself in there. So we'll get those installed here in a few minutes, but that's what that is for. This bundle right here is going to be for the emergency flashers there was an option where the emergency flashers used to live up in here in the glove box. And so that's what this bundle is for. We're going to actually end up cutting this and removing it. We're not going to use it because we ended up getting a later model steering column. This steering column will have the emergency flashers right here, and we're going to wire it in to the standard bracket down here. Now this wiring harness, it comes with the option to do the 68 and 69s that had the flashers here in the glove box, or later models 70, 71, 72 that had it right here on the dash or in the steering column. So it's a versatile kit. We're just going to actually just remove this and get it out of the way. The next bundle of wires is this guy right here. So this is all fused right here, and this is for the stereo system. So whatever stereo system you want to install, it's likely going to need this yellow wire, which is a constant 12 volt to the battery, and that's going to maintain the memory in your stereo. So when you turn the key off, that will still be powered. And then you've got keyed ignition. This is to power the radio, the brown one. And then you have illumination or dash lights on this gray one right here. So we'll use all three of these on the stereo. So we'll leave that there for now. And then right here, we've got this one hanging down. This is just a spare dash light right here. And we're gonna end up using this when we install the Restomod air conditioning bezel. That's what goes in this space right here. The air conditioning sliders. There's an electronic one that Restomod makes, and it will bolt into this stock location. And we'll use this dash wire, or this dash lighting wire, to backlight the back of it, right? So that's what that'll be for. Moving along, over here in this section, you've got this bundle of wires right here with this fancy special connector. There is another connector that's in the kit, and what you'll end up doing with this one is wiring it into the wiper motors. So you see The wiper motor is installed still, and it has this kind of old school connection right here. What we're going to end up doing is actually cutting this connector off, wiring up a new connector that matches this guy right here so we can plug in the wiper motor here. That'll be one task that we do here soon. The next bundle of wires that we have is this guy right here, and this is going to the brake switch, and it is a constant 12-volt signal on the orange, so that whether the key is on or the lights are on or not, it doesn't matter. If you get in and hit the brake pedal, it's going to illuminate the brakes, and that's what this bundle right here is for. There are two different types. You see you get this type and then you got that type, so either type will work. I normally just cut this piece off right here and only use this one right here. That's what that set is for. But right by the wiper motor bundle is this bundle right here that's kind of all zip tied together, so you know that it gets routed together. And what this is it is the electronic choke. That's this tan wire right here. You've got a constant 12-volt signal right here that's going to go to your distributor. You've got a tack signal that gets wired into the coil right here. Then you've got another coil signal, and then this green one is the horn, I believe. So almost all of this is not going to be needed, so we're going to just cut this whole section out of here, remove it from the harness because we don't need it, and it'll help clean up underneath this dash a little bit better. So now I'm over here on the driver's side. Let's start looking at some of these wires. So you see this bundle right here, and you'll recognize it because it's got two purple wires in it, and it's got a green wire and then another salmon colored or pink wire. You'll notice that all the wires that are this kind of, I don't know what you would call it, salmon, pink, some people would call it a red. Anything salmon, pink, or red is going to be 12-volt keyed inside this harness, and anything orange is going to be 12-volt power directly from the battery. So these two purple ones right here, these are important. Normally, this bundle right here would go through the firewall down under the truck and go back toward the transmission, and this would be for your neutral safety switch. And then you would have this green one right here for your backup lights, right? So you've got wherever the mechanical system is on your transmission, if you've got like a C6 transmission or something like that, when you put it in reverse, it'll send power from the salmon wire through that reverse switch and back on the red one. And then you've got the two purple wires. One is send and one is receive. So you're just sending power from the key switch through the transmission selector that's mounted on the side of the transmission and back on the other purple wire that would end up going to the starter solenoid. So you'll have to find out which one is which down here, but either way, I am not running any of these down to the transmission because all that is actually done electronically. Now, we still need all of these wires here. We're going to use this green one and wire that into a Dakota Digital gauge module, the GSS 3000. That is going to know based on the computer, it's going to tell the computer is going to tell the Dakota Digital gauges when the transmission is in reverse, and it's going to output a 12-volt signal. I'm going to use that 12-volt signal to actually turn on the reverse lights in the rear of the truck. And I'll also use that to to tell the electronic rear view mirror, which I will be mounting on the windshield right here. It will also tell that to switch to backup mode on the electronic rear view mirror. So that's what those two do. And then of course, like I said, the neutral safety switch. Now, we're also going to use that same GSS 3000 to fire a relay that is going to, as long as you're in park or neutral, it will allow us to send the key switch signal command to actually start the truck. So I'll explain that in detail when we get to it, but that's what this bundle is. This, you do not need to route through the firewall like the instructions say to do when you're doing a Coyote swap. Next bundle is this guy right here. This is going to go to the wiper switch itself. So that just literally clips right into the back of the wiper switch, and that'll go right down here. The next bundle is this right here. You may recognize this one because this is the same one over here on the driver's side as well as on the passenger side, and this goes to the door switch. I mentioned that earlier. The next bundle we got right here goes to the key switch. And so this mounts into the key switch right here. All three of these bundles right here go to the back of that. So that's in place right where we want it. The next bundle is this one. This is actually going to go back through the dash, down around to right here by your left foot down here. And that's going to go to the high and low beam switch. What else we got? And then we got this big one right here. This is going to go to the back of the light switch that's going to be mounted here in the dash as well. So notice how I got all these kind of set out here, hanging over the dash where everything really goes. Now I'm going to start one by one cleaning some of this stuff up, getting my dash switches mounted in place, looming up wires and those type of things. All right, moving along. Now you'll notice that there's this connector right here. I might be able to give you a close-up of it. And you see this connector right here? This one has another connector harness that it comes with the kit. And basically you can disconnect the gauge cluster that goes right here if you ever wanted to take it out of the truck. And that's why there's a connector here. What I'm going to do with this is basically cut this off, or I'll use the connector and cut the wire shorter. But almost all of this is going to get wired into the Dakota Digital gauge control box because this is everything for all of the little dummy lights on the old school gauge cluster that used to be in this truck, where it would tell you if the dome light, where it would tell you if the bright lights are on, left signal, right turn signal, the brake warning lamp, tack, and all that stuff is in here. So this is actually going to get wired into the new Dakota Digital gauge cluster. So we'll have that one out here and have it handy, and then I'll go into detail on how all that is wired up as well. Now there is one more connector that I forgot to talk about. That is this guy right here, and you'll notice that it's got an unusual design if you've never seen one before. But this is a flat buckle style connector, and this is going to connect directly into your steering column. Now, if you've got the original steering column in the truck, there are adapter pieces that you can plug into this that will plug into that old style of Ford or even a GM steering column. And so you don't have to unwire anything. You could use that. In our case, this is a new I Did It steering column, and it comes with the correct connector here. So this is literally just going to plug right into the steering column, and it should work fine. All right, so I just took off the steering wheel and I removed the horn button here, and I noticed a couple things. One, the horn button isn't wired in correctly. It's missing a ground wire that's supposed to go from one of those two tabs right there. It doesn't really matter, it could go to either of the two. And it should go to one of these 3 bolts that are in here. Now, I don't know, if you're a car guy, you will probably notice something very unusual about this. It is missing the 3 bolts that should be holding this steering coupler on. It just has the center nut. This is pretty dangerous. I'm going to end up removing this and putting those in there. I'll go find some, I think they're some quarter 20 bolts to put in there. But what would happen here is eventually this would get a little loose, and then the whole steering wheel would spin around in your hand and actually not turn the wheels. I'm glad I took the steering wheel off and looked at this. I'm just gonna put the bolts in and just make sure that they're in there. I'm not gonna give this back to the customer, even though maybe he did it or somebody else did it. I don't know, but you got to have those bolts in there. That's a safety issue. All right, it's starting to look cleaner and cleaner and cleaner in here. So what I've done now is I've taken most of those wires and I've separated out just the dash illumination wires and the stereo wires. Those are sitting down here now. All right, so
I'll bundle those up shortly. Now, this bundle of wires, I've wrapped it with that protective tape, and I've done it all the way up through here and actually going out toward the front of the truck. So this looks super, super clean now. Really nice. And that's about how it's going to end up looking. You see it's very minimal look in there. You don't have these big, bright wires stuffed everywhere. They're wrapped nice and tight and then laying down right here on top. Now, remember this wire right here was going to go to the door switch. And then I forgot to mention this one right here. This is a courtesy light that when you open the doors, there is down here, there will be a light that shines down on the floor inside the truck. They came with the kit. We're going to install them, but they'll mount right here to the bottom of the dash. And so, like I said, when you open the door, it'll shine light down here on the floorboard right there. So I'm going to leave those loose. I'll probably just tuck them down here for now and wait till I get to that. The next thing that we're going to work on is right over here. Now we're moving over toward the center of the truck, and you've got the ashtray, the stereo, and then you've got the AC bezel location and everything that's going to go here. But if you look right up in here, we're actually looking inside where the ashtray goes. There's this bar, this flat bar that connects from the firewall to the front of the dash, and it adds some support to the center area of the dash right here. We're going to use this bar and we're going to mount right on the bottom of it. There is a little electronic module, the Restomod air conditioning unit, and I found that that is the perfect location to mount that unit because it's accessible if you need to get to it for programming, because you can Bluetooth to it, use reset buttons on it, so you need to access it. But it's also far enough out of the way where you don't see it or anything like that. So we're going to remove this bar because it's just bolted in with 2 bolts. We're going to remove it, and then we're going to mount that, drill some holes and mount that module to it, and then reinstall it.
Well, you remember the control pack, right? Here is the fuse box, and I stripped off about 10 pounds of plastic and tape and all kinds of crap. I needed to get this thing just stripped down because, you know, the way that this control pack harness is designed, it's kind of one size fits all, and it didn't make a lot of sense the way that it was. So I stripped everything off. Oh, let me tell you, I spent about 1.5 hours to 2 hours stripping plastic off. Next, I drilled this hole right here, and you can see we've got some big connectors, right? So these big connectors, they don't want to go through, you know, any reasonably sized hole, of course. And I'm not going to unpin all these connectors. I'm not going to cut them and then rewire them all to get it through a small hole. So they make this kind of kit where you can drill a big hole, and then you use this guy right here. This is going to fit on there like that, right? And then this is going to fit on there and close that hole up. In fact, we're going to go like this and close that hole up, and we'll put a grommet covering that one, so we've got a spare hole there. But it will clean it up and it makes it look real nice, and you don't have to worry about unsightly holes in your firewall. So next, look, I hate these control packs. The control pack is awful. I would go with Power by the Hour and use their control pack. So much easier to deal with, more versatile in my opinion. With this control pack, you are stuck in this particular truck. You can't really put it anywhere else but like right here or up against the firewall or inside the truck somewhere. Unfortunately, you cannot put this outside of the truck toward the core support or anything like that due to the way length of wires and stuff like that. So what I ended up doing is putting some riv nuts right here, and we're going to be able to install this right here, and then the wires are just going to come out and duck in right there. So you should see just a little bit of a bend, and we'll hide most of the wiring. So, start feeding this stuff through. We'll finish looning the other set of the rest of the wiring once we go inside the truck. So that guy's gonna mount right there. I think that's gonna look pretty good. All right, well, my battery died and I didn't realize it, but I did get this mounted up. It's a little loose right now, and I got this installed down here, this bulkhead, and that went pretty well. I do have a grommet in there. I need to find a blank grommet to blank that hole off right there, but that should be pretty easy. This guy is going to be nice and tight. Now the next thing we have to do is start wiring up the power and ground for this bad boy. According to the Ford Racing control pack directions, this showed up loose right here, by the way. But what we're supposed to do is there's another nut in the box somewhere, and we're supposed to run another power from here directly to the battery. So we'll run it along here and go directly to the battery. And we're supposed to run another nut down on top of this, apparently. And I don't know, I have not installed the Ford Racing control pack before. I've done Nathan Hensley's and Powered by the Hour before, but not the Ford Racing control pack. And by the way, I will never install it ever again. Not a fan at all. Okay, so we've got the ground wired here, so that's gonna kind of tuck into the loom right there. We're gonna run another wire up to here. Now, what I think I'm going to do is I don't want an ugly red wire, so I think I'm gonna just run a black one and then use a little red collar on it and label it as constant power. Now I thought I should mention that right here on this Ford control pack fuse box here, there's really two wires that are coming directly off of this. One of them you're going to install, which is here, this power wire, and the other one is a fixed ground. It's pre-wired into the control pack, and you can kind of see it hanging down there. Both of those are going to run along the harness and go down to the passenger side frame rail, where I'm going to land the power and the ground in that area there. All right, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to run this down below the inner fender and run it along here, kind of like that on the inside of the inner fender. Boom. Do it that way. I think it'll turn out nice like that. Now there's one thing before we move on I wanted to bring up that I didn't record on camera, and my sincere apologies for it. But if you recall, a few moments ago, I mentioned that I had stripped that harness down and I removed a ton of plastic and tape and things like that. Well, part of stripping that harness down is I made some adjustments to the length of some of the wires, so I didn't have knotted, bundled up crap underneath the hood in several places. So that was one purpose, but the other purpose was there are several wires on this Ford Racing control pack that you actually don't need, or you may need them depending on your application. For my application, there are at least a half dozen wires or connectors on this Ford Racing control pack that I actually did not need. So for instance, one of the first connectors that I just cut right out of this harness is this C1743, and this is the charge air coolant temperature sensor. And generally this sensor would be used if you were going to be optioning for EcoBoost or turbocharged or supercharged engine applications, and that's just not something that we're doing here. The next one is this 1217 CPC.
This one is the charge air coolant pump connector, so it works in tandem with the CACCT, the charge air coolant temperature. I also removed the intake air temperature sensor. This one had to go as well because it too works in tandem with supercharged or turbo applications. The next one is this C257. This is a clutch pedal position switch. Obviously we're not using that one, so I hacked that one off and heat shrunk the ends on it as well. Moving along, I also cut out the C8 PATS module cable. This one is where if you're going to be using like the stock steering column and key switch and you want it to work just like the Mustang GT does, and you're going to use the keys and the key fob and all that stuff, you would use this cable right here, and you would have to have the control pack programmed accordingly. Next, I got rid of the C129, the idle air temperature. Again, works with the supercharged applications, and we didn't need this one either. Next, we got rid of the ambient air temperature. Now this one you could use if you wanted to. You could hook up a sensor to it and it would go to the PCM. And then if you're running Dakota Digital gauges, that ambient air temperature sensor would then get routed into your Dakota Digital gauges and displayed there. We're not going to do any of that, and it's irrelevant for what we want to do. So I just went ahead and removed this one as well.
It has been at least 2 weeks since I've been able to film anything on this truck. And unfortunately, I had some stuff I needed to do for work, and I do travel quite a bit for work. So like almost 70 to 80% travel sometimes. So I was out in California and then Chicago and then Colorado. Went back home to Colorado where I'm from for a few days, and now I'm back. And I had to make up some ground on this truck build. Like I said, I lost 2 full weeks of filming and everything. So I had to get a lot done in a short amount of time. Unfortunately, I was not able to film a lot of it, but I've got a better way to show you how all this wiring comes together. Now, I was pretty surprised at how fast I am able to get some of this stuff done if I'm not holding a camera. That takes up a lot of time. So I was able to completely finish the Restomod air conditioning, fully wire in the Dakota Digital gauges, wire in fuel system, run the fuel lines, install the radiator, install the PCM, double check everything. And we're at a point now where we're ready to actually start this thing up. And I will be honest with you, I did fire it up a few minutes ago. And I have to say, I have 100% success rate on all of the F100 Coyote swap builds that I've done, where I have been able to completely wire it up, stick the key in it, and fire it up, and it fires the first time with no issues. And that's how easy it is to install this stuff. Everything's labeled easily. You know, you might have some minor issues on like maybe the neutral safety switch wiring or something like that, but even that stuff is super easy. So like I said, I've gotten to the point now where I just wire everything up, I stick the key in, and it fires up without any issues. So without further ado, let's go ahead and just test this thing real quick. Now I can't run it too long because I haven't burped the coolant or anything like that yet. I basically looked around to make sure that there's no wires laying on exhaust or anything like that, so I can quickly fire it up, but we'll have to shut it off quickly. Oh, that's a good sound. Hear the fuel pump prime. Very nice. I am happy with that. We see a little bit of smoke there. What's that from? Looks like you see that smoke in the camera? Looks like the brake master cylinder is leaking on the exhaust manifold. It looks like I'll let the customer know that he's got something leaking down here. This isn't part of the my install here, so that's his to work on.
Okay, so this is the part of the video that I think most of you guys have been waiting for. We're going to go over actually integrating the Ford Racing control pack with the American Auto wiring harness, along with Dakota Digital gauges and some of the other components that come with the Dakota Digital gauge cluster. So
The major components that we've got here are of course, the Ford Racing control pack. You've got the Dakota Digital gauges. Now you've got the gauge, and then you've got some components here. You've got the controller itself. You've got the BIM-01-02, and then you've got the GSS 3000. So of course, the Ford Racing control pack, that is designed to allow the engine to run in a swap vehicle, and it's got a bunch of capabilities that we're not even going to use, and I've already shown you how we remove those. Now, one of the first components that I wire up is the general truck wiring harness stuff. So that's things like your high beams, your left turn signal, right turn signal, your brake warning light, and things like that. And if you look here on the controller, you've got just what I said: high, left, right, gear position, the 4x4, and those type of things, right? Now, this section of the American Auto wiring harness, there is a connector right here that comes with the kit in the American Auto wiring harness, and it's going to have all of that stuff that you need. So you don't have to unwire your steering column or break that open and run any wires or anything like that. You have everything you need right here on this connector. So you connect that extra connector with the blunt ends that just hang, flying leads that are kind of hanging out there. You mount that in a location that's near the Dakota Digital controller here. And then you just simply wire them up where they say to wire them up. So for instance, you're going to have a lead for the left turn signal. You're going to have a lead for the right turn signal. There'll be one for the brake light, and there'll be one for the high beams. Take all those, route them nice and neat, and then land them on these pin locations right here. That part is pretty much done. Now, you'll also see some leads for like tack or coil and stuff like that. You can cut those. We're not going to use those, but if you do cut them, make sure that you put some heat shrink over them so that they don't make any contact with metal surfaces underneath the dash.
All right, I apologize about that last segment. My mic died and I had to do a voiceover, so if it seemed like it's out of order, it didn't make sense, that's why, but I think it turned out okay. Should have anyways. I'm going to pull this off here, and I'm just start walking through all the different locations where I've landed stuff. I like to use Velcro, by the way, on this particular piece, so I get it up out of the way where I'm not taking up real estate in other places, like trying to mount stuff here or anything like that. You notice that I mounted this kind of up high. If you look way up in there, this is like as high up as possible. And the reason for that is when we try to put the actual cluster in here, the cluster comes in right about here, and it will almost touch this right here. So if you have this down lower, you can't get the cluster in here. So you got to have these up here as high as possible. I just take a piece of scrap metal. In this case, I've recently been buying framing squares because they're only $5, and you get the correct, like 2-inch by 12-inch long piece of flat metal or aluminum. To be able to mount this stuff up here pretty nicely. So that's why I do that. If you just buy flat stock aluminum, it costs like $10 for this length. But if you just buy a framing square, it's $5. So you can save a little bit of money. Anyways, I just use riv nuts and then just mount these modules to the piece of metal here, and then use riv nuts, drilling holes into the dash here to mount this up here. So 2 bolts basically, and this whole assembly can come out. So I take it out, I prep it on the bench, and then I mount it up in here, and so most of the wiring is already done. If you look over here, you see this relay right here. This relay will come with the Dakota Digital GSS 3000. That's going to be for your gear position, neutral safety, backup lights, and things like that. And that's what we're going to talk about here in a moment, but I want to talk about powering all these devices real quick. If you look up in here, you need to get keyed power from somewhere. And the American Auto wiring harness has this pink wire right here. And don't mind the Wago connectors. These are temporary. I like to use these until I get all my testing done. And then once everything tests good, all my stuff works real nicely, then I remove these, I put in permanent connectors, I loom all this up and make it look nice and pretty, kind of like how this is loomed here and this section down here is loomed up right here. I make it all look pretty and simplified quite a bit, and it takes up all the space right here. It looks a lot better. But so I'll digress. But for now, this salmon colored or pink colored wire on American Auto wiring harness, you can see right here, it says 12 volt ignition. And that is whenever you turn the key to the on position, not cranked or started, but when the key is in the on position, you're going to get power on this 12 volt ignition wire. And that is, you'll find this same wire throughout the wiring harness, and it's powering certain things. And then they also give you blunt leads so you can power auxiliary devices like the Dakota Digital gauges. So look throughout the wiring harness, you'll see these salmon wires here. You want to tie them in to where it says ignition 12 volt or ignition power on the Dakota Digital gauges. So right here, I've got it tied into the plus right here, 12 volt ignition. And then I pull off of that and I come over here and I also power 12 volt ignition on this device, the GSS 3000 as well. Now, this is the module for you to go to digital gauges, and it also requires a constant 12 volt battery signal. So whether the ignition is on or off, you're still going to get 12 volts there. Now, you see these orange wires right here. The orange wires in the American Autowire wiring harness, that is battery 12 volts. It's still fused from the fuse box, but regardless if the key is on or not, you're going to get 12 volts on that wire. And so that's the wire that I use up here to the 12 volt constant power. So I use constant power, 12 volt ignition, and then ground. So look over here. Now, if you look right here, I drilled a hole and installed a riv nut right here into this dash frame right here. And all of my ancillary devices like Dakota Digital gauges and other devices, I'm going to land my ground right here for these components. So the GSS 3000 and that type of stuff. And that's where these are. I'm also getting my fuel sender ground from here as well. We'll go over that in a second. But that is where I'm taking all my ground. So you see up here the ground, it's a white wire I've got running down here to this ground terminal here. And then the same thing with my ground from the GSS 3000, it's coming down here as well. And then if you look up here, my fuel sender, this one right here, this one is actually, I got it semi-loomed here, but it is also going down here and also landing here as well. Now let's talk about the GSS 3000. So you see I mounted it right over here, right justified of the module for the Dakota Digital gauges. And you see that there's not a lot of wires. They look scary with all these pins in them, but don't let that scare you. Most of this stuff is super easy. So let's start with the bottom here. You see the red, green, and black. You see these right here. This is actually going to that potentiometer that mounts on the side of the transmission. And well, whenever you're putting the gear in park, neutral, and reverse, it's moving that arm, and that arm is sending a signal back here on these three wires that tells this device the position of the throw of the transmission selector arm. And that is going to correspond to a position: park, reverse, neutral, drive, overdrive, blah, 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 blah. And you'll set that up and calibrate it with this set button right here. So you press and hold it when you're turning the key on, that puts it in program mode. And then you'll run it through the different gears, pressing the set button, and that programs it. Pay attention to the manual when you program that. It's super easy. But again, you've got ignition and ground, where you're going to have keyed on ignition. That's the salmon wire right here. And then, of course, you ground it to a common ground somewhere. Now, the other thing to pay attention to is you've got this backup right here. And that is the green wire on the American Auto wiring harness. You'll see it, and if you read on the wire, it says reverse lights on it. And so I land that reverse lights right here on the backup. So what happens now is when I put this in reverse, you'll see reverse will light up here, and it will apply 12 volts on this terminal, which will power the lights at the rear of the truck, illuminating the ground whenever you're putting it in reverse. And so this green wire actually will run underneath the truck all the way out the back, toward the tail lights and wire into the reverse lights. The other wire to pay attention here is this safety wire. So let's talk about that for a minute. You'll notice that there's this white wire and then there's also this relay over here. Now, the relay comes with the GSS 3000 and you wire all that up a specific way that will allow you to set up a neutral safety circuit. And you don't really need to set this up if you're running a Coyote, and a lot of people argue about this online. People say that you don't need it. I like to do it anyways because when you're turning the key on and then you're sending power to the forward racing control pack to command the engine to start, I don't like to even send power unless I know that it is in neutral or park. So look at this drawing here, and you see I kind of laid this out so basically anybody can understand it, even somebody as stupid as me. So right in the center, I've kind of drawn out the relay that comes in this neutral safety kit, with the GSS 3000. And coming off of that relay, if you're holding it in your hand, you'll see that there's these green, white, black, and red wires. There's also a blue wire, and you don't use the blue wire. You just use the green, white, black, and red. And those are going to wire up to the various components here. Now, on the American Autowire wiring harness, you will see this purple wire right here. If you see that, you see this purple wire right here. And I've got that wired in to the green lead on that relay. So you see here's the relay right here, and you see the green one. That is the purple wire. And if you read it, it says neutral safety switch. So this wire was originally used for the American Autowire wiring harness to go down to the transmission, assuming that you're running an old school C6 transmission. This is just keyed 12 volts to the transmission selector switch. And then there's another purple wire that comes back that when it's in park or neutral, it will have 12 volts on it, and it will then go to the starter solenoid. So what I've done instead is I use the neutral safety switch and I run that into my relay here. And the relay, as long as the relay is closed, meaning it's in park or neutral, and you are in the crank position, so you're turning the key to start it, it will pass power through the relay and over to the forward racing control pack on the light blue wire on the control pack. And if you look at that over here, when you're wiring up the control pack, you'll see this wiring harness right here. It's a plug. You plug it in, and then there's basically 3 wires that you have to wire up. One of them is the fuel pump. That's this green wire right here. That should wire directly to the positive terminal on your fuel pump in the rear of the truck. Then you've got this light blue wire. That is going to be the command to start the truck. And that is when you're turning the key on, it should apply 12 volts. When you're turning the key in the crank position, it should put 12 volts on that light blue wire right there. Then you've got the light green wire, and that is going to wire up to your 12 volt key positive, 12 volt key on. So when the key is in the on position, you should also put 12 volts there. And do you remember which wire that is on the American Auto wiring harness? Correct. It is the salmon color. Like here's an example of it right here. That is that kind of pink salmon color. That on throughout the harness, that is always 12 volt key on. So the light green, it gets 12 volt key on. The light blue is going to come from your relay. So let's go back over here and look at this relay again. Now notice on this relay, you've got the green wire, you've got the black wire, and you've got a white wire here. So looking at the GSS 3000, I've wired the safety output to the pin 85 or white wire on the relay. And then I've got constant 12 volt power going to pin 86, the red wire on the relay. So the salmon colored American Autowire wiring harness, that white wire, or the salmon colored wire will go to pin 86 red wire, and then it switches ground essentially. So whenever you put the truck in neutral or park, it will switch ground on this white wire from the GSS 3000, which will then actuate the relay and allow the 12 volts to pass through from the purple wire to the blue wire over here on the Ford Racing Control Pack. And that will signal to the Ford Racing Control Pack that you wish to start the truck. It is the most simplistic neutral safety circuit I can think of. Very, very easy to wire up. It looks complicated when you look at all these wires and components and everything like that. But if you just boil it down to where the source and destination of the wires are and the purpose for it, it actually is very, very simple to wire up. Very easy circuit. All right, so the next wire on the Ford Racing Control Pack that you need to wire up, this one is as easy as it gets. It's this guy right here. This wire will go into the top of the fuel pedal right here, and that's going to come from the Ford Racing Control Pack. Make sure that's plugged in and clipped in well. The next set of wires are this guy right here. This is already pre-terminated and wired up in the American Autowire wiring harness. And this is an I Did It steering column. This is already pre-wired and wired up as well. You're simply going to clip these two together. And this is going to allow all the controls signals from the turn signals, hazards, horn, and all that stuff to work with the American Auto wiring harness. Super easy. Boom. All right, so the next thing we want to wire up now is the easy stuff. We've got a couple of pre-molded cables. They're going to come with the various components. And you've got this BIM-01-02. Now, if you're going to buy a Coyote motor and do a Coyote swap yourself, I see a lot of guys make this mistake, is they buy the Dakota Digital gauge cluster, and then they go and they install the oil pressure switch that comes with the kit. Then they install the temperature sender, and then they install all the different devices that come with this kit, and they run all those individual wires in here and land them across here, and you don't need to do that. If you're using Dakota Digital gauges and you've got a Coyote motor with the PCM, most of that information comes from the computer through this BIM-01-02, and you don't need to wire up individual sensors. So the oil pressure, temperature sender, ambient air temperature, tachometer, the speed, all of those inputs can come directly from the computer through this BIM module right onto your gauges. So I don't need to wire up any of those across the top. The only thing I need to wire up is the fuel sender. So let's start working on this to get the computer to send all that information to us. Now, if you look at the Ford Racing Control Pack, you get an OBD2 port, and you'll mount that up underneath the dash somewhere. And with this BIM-01-02, you're going to get a cable that goes from the OBD2 port up through that connects the BIM module to the OBD2 port. So I use this double-sided sticky or this hook and loop right here to mount this. So it makes it easy to use some of this extra space right here. And I'm just going to plug this in where it says input right here. And this is the other end of this cable is going to the OBD2 port on the Ford Racing Control Pack. Now we're getting the information from the computer to the BIM module. Now we need to get it from the BIM module to the Dakota Digital module so that it can be displayed on the screen. And to do that, it uses this it uses this 3-wire cable right here. It comes with the BIM module, right? And it is going to connect right here where it says BIM-IO, right here. So it clips in right there. And then it's also going to clip in right here on either one of these two ports on the BIM module itself. And be careful because you can break these things and you'll hear a satisfying click when it clicks into place. And you'll have to do a little bit of programming on this. There's a little manual button right here. You press and hold the button while you're turning the key ignition on, and then it puts this into setup mode. Go through the manual. It takes me less than 5 minutes to program all 3 of these devices. It's super easy to do. Now, one other thing to note is I'm using the RTX gauge cluster where it comes with a few extra bells and whistles. One of them is a little speaker, and I mount the speaker on the side over here, kind of hidden in the dash, and it's got 2 wires that route up over here onto this guy right here. And this is going to connect in the back of the cluster itself. So it does not connect into the module. It connects to the back of the instrument cluster. So we'll let that hang down here. Then you've got this 8-port cable right here. Some of the Dakota Digital gauge clusters use an actual Ethernet cable. On the RTX model, it uses this funny looking cable here, and it plugs in right here where it says display cable. It says display cable, and this is going to also plug into the back of the instrument cluster itself. The next wire that we want to plug in is this guy right here, and this is coming from a little toggle switch down here. You'll see that toggle switch, and that is how the user interfaces with the gauge cluster whenever you're driving or calibrating things and stuff like that. It's a little 2-position switch that you mount on the dash, and I've mounted it right here beside the OBD2 port on the Ford Racing control pack here. This needs to get plugged in as well, and it plugs in right here where it says switch input. So let's get this guy plugged in. Again, there should be a nice little satisfying click. There we go, that clicked in real nicely. Again, this does look like a mess, but don't worry. I'm going to be looming this up and cleaning up some of these wires where you're going to see more of this kind of tightly wound fabric loom and less wires kind of like stuff. It looks like it's stuffed in here, but believe me, there is a strategy to it. Once I get this stuff loomed up, I'll give you another shot of what this looks like, and it'll be much more pleasant and less painful to look at. So you really should have 2 kind of wires hanging down here, and now we're ready to install the gauge cluster itself. Let's go ahead and get that knocked out. This is the RTX cluster. It's one of the nicest ones. I've been using the VHX. It's about, I don't know, like $1,000 cheaper, but man, this thing is super nice. This is the first RTX one I've installed from Dakota Digital, and I really, really like all the extra features, the layout. I think I'm gonna start using this one from now on, actually. I really like this gauge cluster. Super nice. Let's see. Let's hit the bright lights. You see this little blue light? So when I hit the bright lights with my foot, the little blue light comes on, signaling that the brights are on. Very good. Let's put the hazards on. Very nice. Now you see that the lights came on, but they're not blinking. And the reason why they're not blinking is because the relay requires that there be a current draw on the system for the blinker to actually blink. But because there are no light bulbs installed yet, it's not actually going to blink. So let's put that back. You got the right signal, the left signal right there. Very nice. We've got battery voltage that's sitting at like 12.5 volts. That's good. The fuel, I did put exactly a half a tank of fuel in here, and this is showing exactly a half a tank. That's good. And I already configured the gauge cluster, by the way. So I calibrated it to be 10 ohms to 70 ohms signal for the fuel tank and all that good stuff. And I've also set it up all ready to communicate with the GSS 3000 to get park, neutral, reverse. Looks like all of that is working if I switch between gears. Temperature and oil pressure and speed and tach are all coming from the computer, as well as the check engine light is also coming from the computer. So all of that seems to be working very, very good. Excellent. All right, so the rest of this is pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to give you a quick kind of narrative of what I've done here. You can see right here on this main wiring harness that runs through here. I've already loomed up some of it with that nice felt tape, and that's going across this whole system, going out the firewall. You saw me earlier take out this front cross bracket, and you saw me mount the Restomod air conditioning module to this cross bracket. And let's take a look underneath, and you can see where that's located at. So you see here, we're looking upwards from underneath, and you see the connectors right here. This first connector right here is where you're getting your power and ground. And there's also a relay connected to this as well. And this ground is the most important thing of the whole Restomod AC system. They insist that you take this ground right here directly to the battery, not to the frame, not to the engine, directly to the battery. And they do that because a lot of people just, mess this thing up. The system is highly dependent, or the electronics are highly dependent on having really clean power to them. And believe me, I know. If you disregard this and you mount this on like a thin firewall or a ground that's being shared by a number of other things, you are going to run into issues when you try to turn the AC on, or you're changing the vents from defrost to floor or something like that. It will run into issues. So what I have done actually is right here on the firewall, on the other side of this bolt, like if you go in the engine compartment, there is a cable that goes from the other side of this bolt directly to the battery. So instead of me running this thin wire along the frame and down to the battery toward the back of the truck, I land it right here, and it meets a thicker cable that is going directly to the battery. So I have no worries about having a solid ground here. Now, there is on this wiring harness right here a red wire. You can kind of see it. This red wire is getting a key on signal here. So that, remember, any key on the American Autowire wiring harness is that salmon 12-volt key on. So that's where it is running right there. So when you turn the key on, it wakes the system. All right. The next wire that we've got to talk about is right here. There is another red wire that on the Restomod air conditioning that I have a temporary connector because I need to test everything. So wherever you see me using a temporary like Wago clip connector, that is temporary. I don't like sending these cars out to customers with these. Now, I have before in some instances, but wherever possible, I try to use a permanent clip connector that is more weatherproof, like IP67 rated, which these are not. But anyways, you see this brown wire right here, and if you look on the American Auto wiring schematics, there's a brown wire that is meant to power aftermarket AC systems. And so this is fused at 30 amps in the fuse box, and this is made to run the blower motor, which draws a high amperage from the truck system. So you can see it is a number 10 wire. It's kind of thick. This is number 10 as well. And it needs to be that way because it's going to be a little bit higher amperage. So it has its dedicated circuit right back to the fuse box. And it's part of the American Auto wiring harness, right? There are other wires that like I didn't use or didn't need to use. And I put a little, like this one right here, is the alternator wire. We're not running an old school alternator, right? So this wire right here is still running out there, and I've decided to use it as a spare, but I took my wire labeler. I made a label that says spare, and it says right fender. So if you go to the right fender, the wiring harness down there, you'll find the other end of this with another label on it up that points you to up here, where the other end of this is. So wherever that is, there are several wires that I ended up not cutting and using them as spares. So I've got wires ran in different places. And if I need to hook something up like an additional horn or, train horn or something like that, I've got wires already in the system. Okay, so that's this guy. One of the other wires that you're going to need to run as part of the Restomod air conditioning is this white wire right here, and it is actually coming from the relay that's mounted right there. Whenever you turn the system on, now that relay is already pre-wired into the wiring harness. You just need to find a nice convenient place to install that relay. I just kind of zip tied it to the wiring bundle right there. It's easy to maintenance if I need to. But anyways, whenever you turn the power on to the system and it detects that it's calling for air conditioning, so let's say you have it on AC and not heat, it will close that relay and it will send 12 volts on this white wire, and it is meant to go to the compressor clutch. So you want to run that white wire all the way out in the engine compartment and wire it right to the positive terminal of the compressor clutch. Now, what I've done here is I've labeled this properly, but remember I said that this American Auto wiring harness, it's meant for, having a conventional engine like a 302 or something like that in here, right? That has a coil and a distributor cap. I ended up using the coil wire because it's white, and then I just relabeled it with a label right here that says compressor clutch. And I have that, since it's already built into the harness, running down there, and there's a label on it as well that says compressor clutch, and it is now, whenever I turn AC on, it'll send 12 volts over that wire to power the compressor clutch. So you don't have to run all these new wires for this stuff. You can make use of some of the wires that are already in the harness. So notice I have a temporary clip on here. Once I fire this thing up and everything works, then I'll make all these permanent and I'll finish looming this stuff up. Also down here, there is kind of like a little potentiometer. These already come pre-terminated with these clips on them, but it's going to go right there. I'm not sure what this device is, but it just know in the directions it says you need to plug that in, but it is going to the relay that's mounted right there. Next is you've got the actual control bezel for the AC system. It's got this kind of dark cable right here. It just simply plugs right into the side of the control module. And so I've just kind of wound the excess up right here and plugged it in. That's super easy. The next one is going to be this cable right here, this gold colored, and it plugs into the air handler, the side of the air handler right here. So I've just taken the excess and kind of gotten it out of the way and loomed it up. And finally, there is one more wire cable bunch right here. This is, again, like a black cable. And I've got it running through the firewall of the bulkhead that we installed previously. And it goes to a water control valve right here. And this allows water to go from the engine through the heater core so that the heat in the car works, right? And so there's the clip right here, and I've got it going through that bulkhead that we installed, and so it's just a short little jump from the bulkhead right through and lands right here, and that is wired into the control module inside as well. Since we're talking about the air conditioning, let's talk about this stuff out here. So I've installed the condenser, and you've got some hoses and stuff like here. Here's the dryer, and you've got a hard pipe and some hoses that go through the front of the core support and tie into the rest of the air conditioning system. Now, one thing to note right here is this guy right here. This is called a tyranny switch, and it's got 4 wires coming off of it, and it's basically has 2 contacts, or 2 dry contacts, as they say, inside the switch. So once you're at 1 pressure, it will close a set of contacts, and when you're at another pressure, it will then close another set of contacts. And this is for 2 things. 1, turning on the fan controls, and turning on the compressor clutch. So remember that white wire that inside that says coil? I misspoke earlier. It's actually routed from there. It goes through this tyranny switch and then to the compressor clutch. So whenever 2 things happen, 1, the pressure is appropriate in the system and the AC is on, it will then send voltage to the compressor clutch. And earlier in the video, I kind of walked you guys through how all that works, the whole tyranny switch setup. So you could rewind the video and look at it again if you need to. All right, next thing to talk about is this guy right here. This is the Ford Racing Control Pack PCM. Now, I am waiting on a nice fancy little bracket that's going to mount this right here. But on the Gen 3 engine, there are 3 connectors. One of them is a transmission connector. The other one is your engine harness. And the other one is for the Ford Racing Control Pack fuse box right here, right? All these just plug right into the PCM, and then a couple of them tie together. So for instance, there's a plug right here where you're going to plug in the control pack to the engine harness right here through that plug. And then from the control pack, there's one wire right here that plugs into the transmission harness. And these only exist on the control packs that you buy. Like when you, the stock Mustang does not have this wire right here. So those are pretty self-explanatory. You just simply plug them in. Too easy.
One of the things about the Coyote, it's very, very sensitive to air pockets being inside the motor cooling jackets. So we need to run it and burp this thing. I use this tool right here. And basically just a kit with a bunch of different fittings and stuff on it. I'm going to hook it up and show you guys how this thing works, but this is my favorite way to burp a cooling system, is using one of these. They've been around for many, many years, and if you don't have one, they're only a few bucks at Harbor Freight. So let's get started on this thing. All right, pretty simple. You just take the lid off and you find the fitting that is going to work. And this is a Wizard cooling. I think the guy got this from Fat Fender Garage. This is one of those ones where it's, like I said, I'm doing somebody else's build where they left off. So they never finished this build. So they got to where as far as they could go, and then they handed it to me and asked me to finish it. Basically, it's got a little O-ring on it right here. That fits in there, makes a seal, and then it comes with a specific cap. And basically you kind of squish it down on there, but centers it up. So that's good, that's sealed. Then you use this guy right here, and it's got a little plunger that seals this. You'll see how it works here in a second. On coolant, make sure you consult a manual to make sure that you're using the right type and that you are using 50-50 mix. This is the orange, I think, what it calls for, Ford Lincoln Mercury 2002 and newer. There we go. So look at that. See how it's full? And then you kind of just pull this plunger out. And it's going to start burping all the air bubbles out and replacing the air with coolant. It's kind of burping out and creating a little bit of a mess. So let me just set the lid over it a little bit. Cool. Now the fun part is where we fire this thing up and let it get hot. And as it's getting hot, it's going to open the thermostat. It's going to start circulating coolant throughout the system. As it circulates the coolant, obviously it's going to be circulating the bubbles. Once the bubbles go to the high point in the system, which in our case, it's right here on the top of the radiator. Once the bubbles get here, they get evacuated out through here and then replaced with coolant, right? And so you want to make sure that you leave a little bit of coolant right here inside the hopper. I leave it like maybe 25-30% full like that. Keep your coolant handy. Well, let's go ahead and fire this thing up now. Now keep in mind, when you fire this thing up for the first time, your build has probably been sitting there for a year or two, 3 years, 5 years. The guy that did this truck, he did the Coyote swap himself. He did the Crown Vic, and he did a lot of this stuff, but he just didn't do any wiring. Now this truck has been sitting for 5 years with this engine in it. I think it said 5 years. Well, the truck itself has been sitting for 10. He originally had a 4.6 in it. Halfway through that build, he decided to go with a Coyote motor, pulled the 4.6 out, did the Coyote. Long story short, this thing has been sitting for a long time. Some stuff has degraded. You don't know if stuff is loose, like hoses or anything like that. I don't know the state of this motor. I don't know where he got it. So all this is to say is when you fire these things up for the first time, make sure you're looking around, listening, and being keyed up on sounds, banging noises, or fluid shooting out all over the place, looking underneath it. Don't just fire it up and sit inside the cab for a period of time without coming out here to look and see what's going on. The other thing is to make sure that there's nothing in the way of rotating equipment. Looks good, sure. I don't think we'll have any issues. I did my once over. I noticed there's nothing laying on the exhaust manifolds up underneath the truck. I don't have wiring harnesses laying on the exhaust or anything like that, so we should be safe to fire this thing up. I always make sure I have my trusty white monster. I get all excited when I'm firing a truck up for the first time. Got my key, which is my trusty flat tip screwdriver, because the key and the tumbler have not come in yet. Thanks to Dennis Carpenter for not sending it yet. Ooh, good sound. It means the fuel pumped. You heard the control pack click on. You heard the relays click on. So we are ready to start this thing. Let's make sure it's in park. It is, and our neutral safety switch is working. Very good oil pressure. Check that out. You see the bubbles? So one of the other things we want to make sure of is that as we warm this thing up, that functionally everything is working, right? The tachometer works. We're getting air bubbles out of it. It's circulating. Thermostat is opening. And we also want to make sure that the fans kick on when they're supposed to kick on. So we need to pay attention to the tachometer and make sure that it's not, or not the tach. We need to pay attention to the thermostat and make sure it's not getting too hot. See how the temp is starting to come up? Oil pressure was like super high at first, but as it heats up, the oil pressure goes down. See if the tach works. Let me rev it a little bit. Very good. Also, check out when I rev it, we should get some air bubbles out. Oh yeah. Battery looks good right here. The check engine light is not on. That's good. Very nice. Let's look underneath the truck. I don't see any fluids leaking. Looks like this guy's got some major exhaust leaks. Major exhaust leaks. That looks pretty healthy. It is a little cold outside, so that looks normal. We're getting into the colder Georgia weather now. Let's make sure we don't have any leaks coming from the AC or coming from the heater hoses. None there. It's completely dry, so all this looks good. Down here in the inner fender, it's still kind of cold, but again, we don't have any leaks here, so that's good. One of the things that we need to do is actually open up the heater valve to allow coolant to go through the heater. So to do that, we're going to move this over to the right on heat. The valve should be automatically opening. We'll just put the heat on right now. And we're going to let it run like that with the heat on for a little while to allow coolant to go through the heater lines and through the heater core to get all that air out. So check that out. Now that I did that, we're getting more bubbles out. Now it is smoking right here at the front of the motor, because the motor is getting hot. And the reason for that is previously I was priming this radiator, putting coolant in it, and I did not have these fittings on, and of course the level of the coolant was higher in the radiator than it was here, and I was getting some coolant spilling out. So that's what you're seeing with this smoke right here. I don't know if you can see it or not. You see that smoke? That's that coolant burning off. So really what we need to do is get this thing warmed up, make sure there aren't any leaks, put the tires on it, back it out of here, and then kind of wash this engine off and get some of that sticky coolant off of it. Very nice. Let's put some more coolant in here. Let's rev it. And the fans came on. I don't know if you heard that or not. That is good news. The fans came on. They didn't stay on very long. It cooled it pretty quickly. That's a pretty nice radiator. I guess it's worth the money. It's pretty pricey. All right, cool. So we've got it. All right, cool. So we've got it shut off now. So let's go ahead and we're going to take the plug it, that. Then it's pretty simple. Then you just kind of hold it and unscrew it. You don't want to jerk up on it because hot stuff will fly everywhere. So you just want to kind of wiggle it out of there carefully. You get a little bit of spillage, and that's fine. Cool, you see that? See, because we got it plugged. Now we're going to put that back in the jug. All right, let's address the elephant in the room. You see this transcooler right here. So this is the original transcooler that was in the Mustang GT. The customer wants to handle this himself and did not want to install a remote like the Rally transcooler. I insisted, but he just wanted to handle it himself. So the agreement is that I would just put this somewhere out of the way where it's not going to drag on the ground, it's not going to hit rotating equipment or anything like that. So this is the best place I could find to put it. So he's going to handle it himself. So that is, if you're screaming through the TV right now, this is that is why we did this. So. All right, well, that is going to do it for this episode of Tinkered Diesel Garage. Look, this was a fun one, and I like it because we didn't have to do the Coyote swap ourselves. All that was already done, so the owner had already installed the Coyote motor, the transmission, did the rear end, the Crown Vic swap. All we had to do was the fun stuff with coming in, wiring everything, doing the air conditioning, and firing it up for the first time. So that's always the funnest part, and I really, really appreciate the electrical part. And maybe you will too a little bit more after watching this video. So I really hope it was helpful. And look, my sincere apologies if some of this seemed confusing. It is very, very difficult to film up underneath dashes and explain some of the electrical, but I try to do it the best I could, and this won't be the last one that I do. I plan on getting better and better at filming and editing, and hopefully you guys will get something out of the content I'm creating. So I look forward to the next build. We've got a lot more stuff planned. I'm going to be doing some major updates to Old Blue, the long bed 1970 that we've got out front. We're also going to get back on that 1966 Dodge Coronet, the Hemi swap, and I've got a really cool treat for you guys next week. See you guys then.